Then I noticed Vova, one of the Russian guys, he's standing. And I remember thinking, you out of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't say anything because I was just so gripped. Next thing, my rope goes tight and I know I need to move.
Yeah.
And I turn and I tell Martin, you need to get out here as soon as you can. As I start climbing down, I don't see it, but the two of them get struck by lightning.
Well, hello. Welcome to this episode of the God Seeker Podcast. My name is Joe Martin Jr., and my guest today is Alex Harris. Alex, good to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Absolute pleasure.
I've been waiting on this moment. We've been together around the world, different places around the world. I've been waiting on this moment to get together and help share your story with my friends and those that are out there that listen to the podcast. And so I'm just thrilled that you're here today. Thank you.
Well, it's exciting to be here at last.
Yeah. Well, first thing I always do is just read a brief bio so people kind of get the context of you and who you are and what you do. And so let me just share this, okay? Yeah. Our guest today is South African explorer and adventurer Alex Harris. Alex has spent more than 3 decades pushing the limits of human endurance on the world's wildest frontiers. He's climbed the 7 summits, the highest peak on all 7 continents. He stood on top of Mount Everest as one of South Africa's most respected high-altitude mountaineers. In 2008, Alex became the first African to walk unsupported to the South Pole, a brutal 65-day, 1,200-kilometer trek through Antarctica. He later completed a world's first unsupported crossing of the empty quarter, that is, the vast Arabian desert, which cemented his reputation as a true pioneer of modern exploration. Today, Alex brings those experiences home as a storyteller, a leader, a coach. He's challenging us to confront our fears, embrace discomfort, and live a life with purpose. Alex is happily married to Nadia, and together they have 4 children. Please join me today in welcoming my friend, Alex Harris.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Alex, what a life, man.
Yeah, and I've still got a way to go.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even mention how you and I met the very first time we met. We have a friend in common in South Africa, and he called me one day, and he said, look, I've got a guy in my church who's coming through Dallas. Would you host him for a night or two? I thought to myself, well, sure, yeah, great. He said, well, he's been on some kind of bike race, so I don't know, he can tell you all about that, but anyway, I'd love for you to meet him. I think you'll enjoy him. So I picked you up at the airport the next morning, the next day, and you had your bike with you. And I remember it like today, like it was yesterday. You had a T-shirt and shorts and your jogging shoes. And so we sat down a little bit and got in the car, and we're out the door, out at the airport. And I said, well, what have you been doing? And why don't you pick it up from there?
Well, so this is, just to refresh my memory, you've picked me up after the race now.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So, the logistics, I had just done a thing called the Tour Divide, which is a unsupported mountain bike race from Banff in Canada down the Rocky Mountains to the Mexican border. And ultra-endurance bike racing is one of my kind of passions. And if you're an international rider, when you do the logistics, it's pretty complicated. You have to fly in and out of the U.S. somewhere, central. Yeah. That destination, then you have to buy a one-way ticket to Calgary in Canada, take a bus to Banff. 2 days later, throw your clothes away, jump on your bike, race 2,800 miles to the Mexican border, which is Antelope Wells in New Mexico. The closest town is El Paso. Yeah. It's about 3 hours. Then you've got to have someone in El Paso collect you from Antelope Wells, bring you back in El Paso. You buy a one-way ticket back to whatever city it was. And when I done all of those details, Dallas seemed to be where it was at. So that's how I ended up coming through that first time. And who would have thought that 13 years later would be our home?
Yeah. Yeah, that was an amazing moment together.
Yeah.
I can't imagine riding a mountain bike even half a day. But how long did it take you to go 2,800 miles?
So that first time I took 17 days. My best time was 15 days, 12 hours on the Tour Divide. Yeah.
Wow.
and that's about 18 hours a day on your bike. And then you're trying to sleep 3 or 4 hours in a tiny little tent somewhere. You're trying not to get eaten by a bear or bitten by a snake. And, it's pretty intense. If you're not racing, most of the guys do the Tour Divide on the race date, but they really take a month or more and just enjoy what's a world-class experience riding through national parks, quiet forest roads. But if you're on the front end, the sharp end, as they say, and you're racing, then it's a particularly grueling experience because you're uncomfortable for so long. And those who prevail are just those who are able to be uncomfortable for longer.
Yeah. Yeah, and that really is your MO. And you're like an endurance. That's your big deal, right? Endurance athlete.
Now, yes. It's so interesting. My competitive cycling used to be track cycling, and I raced nationally and then went to world champs. And when you're a track cyclist, there's really 2 ways you can go. You can be a sprinter or you can be a pursuiter. And I ended up track cycling as a sprinter. This was before I discovered actually my real gifting was in ultra endurance.
Yeah.
And sprinters typically, they're bulkier guys. They do super explosive stuff. And I remember my coach every year felt I sort of was somewhere in the middle, and he was never sure where to put me at the start of the season, but he always went with sprinter. About a year after my final competitive year of track cycling, I raced my first Freedom, which is kind of like the Tour Divide, but in South Africa. And it turned out actually my real gifting is ultra endurance. And that's kind of the direction that I went from then on,
Yeah. Yeah. And in that Tour Divide, you start in Banff, Canada.
Yeah.
You actually come down the Great Divide, right?
The Continental
Divide.
Correct.
Yeah.
You follow what's called the Great Divide mountain bike trail, and the ambit when they put that together was never to stray more than about 50 miles east or west of the apex of the Rocky Mountains. And so the Tour Divide is racing that route, and that means you're up and down every pass, from the north to the south.
Yeah, and how many is that? How many?
No, that's many. I mean, I forget, but every day you're going at least up over a pass. So, I mean, there's got to be at least a dozen, maybe 15 mountains you're climbing, really big things.
Yeah, yeah. And how many total? I remember you telling me one time, 70,000 meters of climbing. Is that about right?
I forget the total now because it's been so long, but it's a considerable amount. I mean, every day, some of the passes like Marshall Pass, Indiana Pass, by the time you get into Colorado and then sort of southern Colorado, creeping into New Mexico, some of those passes are just, they're 7-10 mile climbs. And if you happen to get there in the dark and you're sleep deprived and you've got sleep monsters hammering away, it feels like you're on that pass clawing into the sky the whole night. It's probably only 2 hours, but it feels like you're suffering the whole night to get up there. Right? Yeah.
And so you're on this. I mean, you mentioned a few minutes ago about some of the wildlife. I think you had an encounter with a bear.
Many bears. Yes, I've seen many bears on the Tour Divide. So I raced 2013, 14, 15, and it's the second Friday in June that the race starts, so it's really almost midsummer, but the northern part of the route, so Montana and then into Canada, the winter prior to the start of the race will determine how bad the conditions are. So if it's been a really bad winter and they've had a lot of snowfall, what tends to happen is that snow still sits quite low on the valleys come summer, and that forces the bears further down to forage, and that's why you encounter them. And our 2013 year was a pretty dry year, but I still saw a couple of bears. I mean, my first night in the race, about 10 o'clock at night, I came around the corner. I was about 200 miles into the race, and I saw a cub and a mother black bear, and they literally just crossed the road in front of me, maybe 10 yards. They stopped for a second, looked, and then carried on. And I was quite excited. And the following year is when I saw my first 2 grizzlies. And that very first year, they had a briefing session with a ranger. And I'll never forget, there's a big argument about carrying bear spray, which is, it's a sizable can. And the racers aren't going to carry anything that, luxurious in weight. So we just carry a little whistle.
Yeah.
But the question came, well, what do you do when you see a bear? And, if it's a brown bear or a black bear, does it differ? And the ranger was pretty clear. Look, you have about a second to shout as loud as you can, go bear, go bear.
Yeah.
And hopefully the bear goes.
Yeah.
So anyway, my second year, it had been a really bad winter in 2013. So 2014 summer, there was a lot of snow up high. And this was the second morning. I was about to cross into the border into the US. It was about 8 in the morning. And I was descending sort of a low kind of pass. I'm going down a little about 20 miles an hour. Not steep, but pretty fast. But the terrain was such that sort of every half a mile, there was a rise in the road and then a slope and another rise. So I really couldn't see more than about a mile in front of me. And as I crested one of these rises, there were 2 grizzlies in the middle of the road, about maybe 100, 150 yards. Now, I'm going at 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So I've got a second to decide, do I slam on brakes, skid to halt, and then welcome them into my space and wrestle with that idea, or do I shout, go bear, go bear? So I shouted, go bear, go bear. They both got up. One immediately ran into the forest, but the other one turned towards me and then gave a couple of, and then he also moved into the forest.
Yeah.
Boy, did my heart beat.
I'll bet.
And I hadn't slowed down at all. So, I made that call. I'm going to shout and I'm going to hope they get out of the way. So I just went past them at 20 miles an hour.
Yeah. People don't realize, though, a grizzly bear can run for spurts 40 miles an hour.
And they're huge.
Yeah.
That thing just lumbered. And I could see he was just disgruntled and he'd made the decision he's not going to waste any energy this morning on some idiot on a bike. He's going to rather give me the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So I was lucky. And then I saw another grizzly actually that same day, but about a quarter of a mile down the road coming towards me, and he quickly headed off into the woods.
Wow.
So
so it's an unsupported race. So what does that mean?
Well, it means you get a GPS file of the route that you download. You have to carry a tracker, so you're in the public domain. And you have to stick to the route, and no one's allowed to meet you on the route with any kind of assistance. Ostensibly, the kind of caveat to the Tour Divide Unsupported is to thyself be true. And so anything that's publicly available to all riders is A-okay. If you had to arrange someone to meet you, that would mean no other rider would have access to whatever they're bringing you, and thus that would be an infringement of the rules. So you're allowed to make use of any motel, but if you're racing, you're typically sleeping in a tiny tent because the towns and the motels consume an enormous amount of time. You're allowed to use a bike shop if you get in the day. You can eat anywhere you want. You can carry whatever you want. You can even send stuff to a post office if the timing works and pick that up, like a chain. Some guys will send a chain. But if you arrive, in Del Norte in the middle of the night and you're racing and you've got a chain waiting and you've got to wait 8 hours, you ain't going to place. So it's not a strategy for a racer, but a lot of the touring guys will certainly do that. So that's kind of what self-supported means. So if you're racing, you've got a tent, you've got your sleeping bag, you've got some warm stuff, you've got water carrying capacity, and all of that is on bikes. You've got a pad. So it's the bikes are kitted out like a proper touring bike.
Yeah. So it's got saddlebags on it. It's got all the stuff you need. Wow. Yeah. And so how do you decide where you're going to pull over?
Well, it's a tricky strategy, and I'm not sure now after 20 years of doing this that I've got the perfect solution, but you want to optimize sleep because the time you spend sleeping is such a small percentage that if it's really good sleep, the impact is compounded versus if it's really bad sleep. And I'll give you an example. That same year, 2014, there was a lot of rain, freezing temperatures. I was in the middle of the night going between Helena in Montana and Butte. And that is a notoriously mountainous section. And sometime around 11 o'clock at night, there's a tiny village between those two that I pulled in. Everything was dead, and I was absolutely sopping wet. I was frozen. It wasn't quite freezing, but it was close.
Yeah.
And I had to just get into my little tent, and I couldn't find anything. So I literally just went on a sort of a wooden porch of someone's house or establishment, put my tent, climbed in there. But I was so soaking wet that I really couldn't sleep. And after about 2.5 hours, I got up and I figured I have to just push through to Butte and check into a motel early in the morning and try and get some sleep. So I just wasted 2.5 hours of energy. You know, ideally, when you start falling asleep, what we call sleep monsters is when you just get assailed by the uncontrollable desire to close your eyes and fall asleep, and nothing you can do can change that. And they keep attacking you. Those are sleep monsters. So you want to ideally, when you start getting into that point, find a place comfortable, put up your tent, and go to sleep. You know, it's and then try and sleep for 3-4 hours and get up. And hopefully in those 3-4 hours, you've had at least 2.5-3 hours of really good sleep. What will also happen is, you know, the guys who are racing, let's say you're racing a 15-day schedule, which is, you know, will be in the kind of top 5. You will probably somewhere in those 15 days sneak into a motel for maybe 4 or 5 hours and just have a bed and catch up and recharge on your sleep. Because no matter how tired you are, you know, the sleep is always compromised in a tiny tent. I remember a morning and an evening I slept. I was heading towards the Grand Tetons, so I was somewhere in Wyoming, but there's a little piece of Idaho that the route crosses over, and I arrived at about 10 at night, put up my tent. Maybe it was about midnight. When I woke, the sun was just coming up, and there was ice on my tent. So that night had gotten to freezing, and you know, it's the middle of summer, but those northern states, it still gets so cold up in the mountains.
So you're battling sleep deprivation, hunger.
Yeah, you eat lots.
And wow.
Yeah, I mean obviously the procrastination to try and become comfortable. Like you just get to a point where you're so painful from vibratory stress. Also in those days, the big thing was to race hardtail, rigid, and that's just dumb. You know, we know now, especially our event in South Africa, our event has kind of meant, the Munger has meant we've been at the forefront of seeing what vibratory stress in the context
now
of...
explain that to everybody. That's the vibration from the...
So as if you think about a car moving over a rugged terrain, the vibrations, the bumps create like a vibratory resonance that propagates through the wheels and eventually into the shocks. The shocks absorb that so that it doesn't propagate through the car and you don't feel it and get your teeth rattled out, you know. A bicycle is not dissimilar, but the shocks obviously are a lot smaller. And without shocks, the vibratory stress that comes through the frame then just simply goes into your body, and our body converts that, that energy is dissipated. In a mechanical way, if you look at engineering, vibratory stress actually can fatigue metal that it breaks. That's the end result. Now, our bones aren't made of metal, so they're not going to literally snap. But this incredible ability to absorb that energy also has a downside. And we have, I have a working theory that vibratory stress dissipated molecularly affects our metabolism, our immune system, and I think guys will start manifesting things like upper respiratory infections, not because they picked up a cold somewhere, but because their body is not able to dissipate the energy of vibratory stress. So in the old days, it was, you were like a real hardcore racer. If you had no shocks, hardtail, they said it's quicker, it's faster. Now we know that to go faster, you need to be as comfortable as you can for longer. And so you want to have shocks, you want to have front suspension, rear suspension on something like the Tour Divide. I know there are going to be some thin guys out there that are going to argue with me, but it's a killer. Vibratory stress is just, it destroys. And it also destroys your hunger. And that's the single differentiator between the guy who wins the race and the guy who comes second, is who's the most hungry for it. If you're constantly trying to find ways to be comfortable because you're so fatigued, you're no longer putting power down on the pedals, and your hunger's gone. And the guy who is comfortable can still focus on putting power, and that's the guy that prevails. So now we focus on trying to build up a bike that'll keep us as comfortable as we can for longer, so that we can actually focus on putting power on the pedals and going as fast as we can. So they kind of work intuitively together, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And so, how do you, as an ultra endurance athlete, how do you keep yourself? I mean, you got to be lonely, right? I mean, there's nobody but you on the trail and some bears. And so for 15 days, 16 days, that's 2.5 weeks.
Yeah,
So how do you deal with that? Physically, I get it. Okay, your body can do more than what you think you can do.
sure.
But mentally, how do you prepare yourself, and how do you go through that?
Look, there are a bunch of strategies that, you know, I've developed over the years, and obviously some of the stuff that we kind of strategically put into our events and our tours. And really, one of the key things is that to focus on the whole objective, the end goal, is most of the time really overwhelming. So, you know, if you're on the bike now, and let's say you're a day in and you've just had a tough day, it's been raining, you know, to think that the Mexican border is still 2,700 miles away is simply overwhelming. And you have to create the discipline to focus just on the now and set small measurable goals. And really the simplest of those goals is a day. You know, like in South Africa on the Freedom Challenge, it's a little bit different to the Tour Divide in that you're not allowed GPS navigation. So it's old school. You're only allowed maps and a compass. And the passes, a lot of them, you have to push your bike over because they've never been ridden by a ox wagon for 200 years. Whereas on the Tour Divide, it's all riding. And it's very intimidating in the dark. And I've just learned to acknowledge, you know, the way God has made this world, there's a type, and part of that is the 24-hour period. There is something unique about 24 hours. There's something unique about the grace and energy we get in a new day with the rising of the sun. And we rob ourselves of that if we combine them all together in a single thought and focus just on the end goal. And so really you've got to forget about all of those and just remind yourself, okay, all I need to worry about is today. I've got energy. I can get to where I need to go. And I know that in those 3-4 hours, I'm going to get rest. I'm going to get a bit of restoration. I'm going to rise in the morning with renewed hunger. The Lord's going to give grace for that day. There's going to be renewed mercy. And so focusing on the small little things, and you can even break the day down into like the next town, if it's 20 miles ahead. If things are desperate and it's a really tough day, you know, like when we were walking to the South Pole, there was a period when I just focused on the next 60 minutes, 1 hour, because I knew at the end of the hour, we would pull up our sleds next to each other, spend 3 minutes sipping something, looking at each other, and just getting enough energy to rise and go for 1 more hour. But I knew if I could do the hour, I could string 7, 8, 9, 10 of those together, and 60 days of those together. You know,
Wow.
So just the inch.
One day at a time.
One day at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, we overplay that metaphor, but it's how God has put it into the DNA of this world. You know, the Matthew 6:34 says, "Don't worry about tomorrow."
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
That's right.
It hasn't happened yet.
That's right.
There's enough to worry about today.
That's right.
Focus on today, and you'll wake in the morning with energy to worry about tomorrow.
Yeah. You know, Alex, there's so many different ways I want to go. When we talk about the Tour Divide, that's how you and I connected, how we met for the very first time.
Yeah.
I remember being in my office, picking you up at the airport, going straight to my office, and you opened up your computer and said, "You want me to show you the route?" And so we're looking at the route, you know, from Banff, Canada, all the way down to the Mexican border, and all these little check marks along the route. Yeah. And I remember turning to you and said, "What are these little check marks for?" And you said to me, those are the people that are still on the race. Yeah. So you're sitting in Dallas in my office. There's guys still in Montana that have just barely out of Canada in the race, and you're already finished in our place. And and that was pretty impressive, pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But that Tour Divide and your mountain bike love has birthed the Munger. And why don't you tell a little bit about that? Then I want to switch gears and I want to go back to how you got to all those places.
Sure. So the Munger is a race in South Africa, which is about 700 miles. So one thing I came out of racing the Tour Divide for 3 years in a row and racing the Freedom Challenge in South Africa many, many times was that the revelation was that the experience was so impactful that I was compelled to change my life, to change the way I thought about things, to change my perspective on what's possible. And I realized that we all need that revelation, but we don't all have a month to go and do the Tour Divide, or 3 weeks to go and do the Freedom Challenge, or a month even. And so how do I offer an opportunity where someone can have that revelation, but in a time frame that's manageable, that's doable? And, you know, I remember I was going through a season where I was thinking about shifting careers and looking for a different way to go about business and kind of seeking the Lord. And out of that came the Munger and this format, which is pretty unique. And so the format is simply 5 days, 120 hours. The gun starts at 12 o'clock on the Wednesday. Riders have exactly 120 hours to ride 700 odd miles till 12 o'clock Monday, 5 days later, to make the cutoff. Along those 700 miles, we have 5 race villages where we create like a guest house feel. So the format had elements of what I experienced in the Tour Divide, but it also had elements of the Freedom. And we also added elements like the semi-supported nature of the guest houses and the 10 water points that are hosted by farmers. And so really the thinking was that at any one of those points, if a rider is so beaten, because the roads are terrible, let me just put it out there. Our dirt roads are like the worst in the solar system. No question about it. The vibratory stress that those roads generate, we now know are off the charts. But the hope was that if a rider got to water point 1 or water point 6 or race village 2 and he was absolutely beaten down, there would be enough in the natural environment leading up to that point that he had seen and taken in, and enough in the hospitality to motivate him, to compel him to go just a little bit further, and there eventually be enough to get him to the end. And I can share a very specific personal example as a testimony to that. You know, that first year, so this was going back to 2015 was the first time we hosted the Munger. And we were really at the start of these kind of gravel road type races back home. And everyone thought our race was going to be just a gravel race, and we thought that as well. Gravel race implies you're on a gravel type bike, skinny tires. It's kind of like a road bike, but geared for dirt roads, not a mountain bike where you've got the full suspension. And that's how guys showed up. And we would eventually have to educate our demographic that, yes, we're on gravel roads, but this is not a gravel race. This is a different type of race. Anyway, a very good friend of mine, Clinton Halsey, he shows up and his bike looked like something that you would use on the Tour de France on the final day, Champs-Élysées time trial. I mean, I remember thinking, man, that's a skinny bike. So he goes and he battles to water point 1, he battles to water point 2, and he calls me from a remote spot and like, I can't do it anymore. I'm done. We don't know why he's done. We're going to learn in time. He's done because the vibratory stress is about to kill him. He's done. Send an ambulance. Now, we had a very small medical infrastructure. And I looked at the tracking and I said, I can't get an ambulance to you. You're going to have to get to RV1 and we'll sort you out. So he gets to RV1 and he has a meal and something. And I'm caught up in the race now, so I don't realize he hasn't pulled out. He's carrying on. The next day I get a call and I see it's Clinton. And I look, but now he's halfway to race village 2. He's done. He's had it. I didn't even know he'd carried on, you know. Can you rescue me? I can't rescue. There's no medical vehicle. Get to water point RV2. On the next section, he's got no signal. He climbs up a hill. He's done. He's once out. He climbs up a hill. He can't get signal. He has no choice but to move
forward.
Long story short, this goes on for 5 days. He tries multiple times, and through a variety of logistical reasons, I can't rescue him. He ends up finishing the Munger, but he's smashed to pieces. That guy went on to become the first guy to do all 10 Mungers last year and become our first general. You know, we've incentivized. So every Munger you do, you get a stripe, one stripe if it's your first 2 stripes. And general was the ultimate. And he became the first rider to do all 10 Mungers. And so we have a ceremony at the start of the race where we put like a Jedi cloak on him. We give him a badge that signifies the highest ranking officer in the race, and we just honor him,
Yeah.
And it's incredible to think that, that guy tried as hard as he could to pull out.
Yeah.
And that's really the point of the Munger. And that's the point of these journeys, is that, we're going to be tempted to quit all the time. But if there's enough in there to compel you to go one more step, then you're surprised where you find the courage, the determination to maybe take a second step. And that's kind of what the Munger is
It's like
about.
you said, you cannot concentrate or think about the end product of getting to the end of the race. You got to think about the next 5 minutes, the next 10 minutes, the next hour. What hour, right? And what a biblical principle that is. I mean, that's you got to live in the now. You have to live in the moment, right? And so that's powerful. Well, I want to switch gears just a little bit, and we may come back to this, but I want to talk just a little bit about your upbringing. Because we haven't covered some of the amazing things that you've done. You had a whole time of your life where you were mountaineering, a whole season of your life. You had another whole season of your life where you were exploring Antarctica and the Arabian desert.
Yes.
Another season. Then you got into bike racing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've had several different seasons of your life. But let's go back before all those. How were you raised? I mean, you're not the typical kid with a bike. How did you get started in all this? Let's talk about your upbringing a little bit.
So I grew up in a sort of a small, what we call a suburb, around Johannesburg, maybe about 10 miles from the center of Johannesburg. And, I had relatively poor folks. My dad worked in the mines. My mom was a full-time mom. And we grew up in a neighborhood where you were just let to basically run around and explore and do your own thing. And, as long as you didn't kill yourself and you were home by 6 for dinner, life went on.
Yeah.
And I grew up on the side of town where the schools weren't really geared to direct kids for a purposeful outcome in terms of what they could potentially study. And my folks were relatively simple people. They were honest folks, but they really didn't think too much about our futures, other than just making sure we were fed, we got to school. So there was no dialogue around, what are you going to do with your future? But there are very clear moments that I remember that directed, without me realizing at the time, the sort of path of my life. And one was this constant, and I later on figured out why my dad used to say this, but really just he would sit me on his lap and he would pretty regularly tell me, son, you can be anything you want. You can do whatever you want to do. And at the time, when I was really small, I wanted to be a Jedi Knight. And then when that didn't happen, I wanted to be an astronaut. I'd kind of altered the idea of a Jedi Knight into a real strategy of becoming an astronaut. And I figured out that I had to enter the South African Air Force and learn how to fly, and somehow get to the US and the American Air Force, and then eventually maybe get into NASA. So I was a pretty rebellious kid at school, other than making sure I got the marks I needed just to qualify to get into the South African Air Force for flight training. But as a youngster, I remember, and I didn't live in a mountainous, Johannesburg is not mountainous. It's more hilly than Dallas, that's for sure. Right. But there's no mountains. There's no reason why a youngster would dream of being an explorer. And that wasn't on the cards for me. I am conscious of the fact that I always looked beyond the horizon in my thinking. I always wondered. So curiosity was something that was fostered in my family. We were allowed to be curious, and if that curiosity led to scouts, we could join the scouts. And so I guess another way to say that is curiosity wasn't stifled, and that's a key thing. And one of the things we try now do with our kids is just exposing them to a few things to stimulate curiosity and just let them see what they may or may not enjoy. So I came out of that sort of school period and I entered the Air Force, and we're going back to the early 90s now. So if you think politically about what was happening in South Africa, 1992, I think Mandela was released. 1994 was our first democratic election. And so the National Party lost power. It was the end of apartheid. The ANC, the first black government, was about to take over democratically elected South Africa. In anticipation of that, we were no longer going to be the pariah of Africa. Our military was sustained on the premise that we had enemies all around us.
Yeah.
And so we had a pretty significant military force in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. But in anticipation of this change in dispensation, they downsized everything. And so one of the knock-on effects was they suspended flight training. They grounded a bunch of squadrons, and it was a very tough time to be in the Air Force as a youngster who wanted to fly. So I spent a year in the Air Force, and I couldn't learn how to fly. I had to sign on for short-term service, which was 5 years, and I didn't do that. And then about 2 years later, my father died, and so I lost the kind of voice that was speaking into me. And right at the same time, I had started rock climbing, and really that, that introduction just came through hiking. In the final year of school, friends of ours, we got together, we did some hiking trails, and we loved the hiking trails.
Yeah.
It was new for us. We got out into the mountains. Then I saw something about rock climbing through the mountain club, and so I joined the mountain club, started rock climbing, and then everything shifted in 1992. And really what happened there was, so this is now just after I've got out of the Air Force. 1992, of course, is on the back of perestroika and glasnost. The Soviet Union have opened their doors. We get invited on an exchange program with some of the Russian Federation mountaineering clubs. I'm a young up-and-coming climber in the Mountain Club of South Africa. I'm invited on a team, and off we go to climb in the Caucasus, and that's where I had that crazy experience,
Yeah.
And so at that point, my life was now pivoting away from sort of potentially being a pilot to, well, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with my life, but I'm loving climbing, and let's see where that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so your first international climbing trip was to Russia?
Well, we had done
Caucasus.
Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and we had done Mount Kenya, which is in obviously Kenya and Tanzania. So I had been on those, but those are kind of mini expeditions.
Right.
I mean, they're not really, Kenya was rock climbing at altitude. Kilimanjaro, of course, as you know, is just a high mountain, the elevation, not technical. That first expedition to Russia was going to be our first introduction to ice and snow climbing at alpine elevation. We don't really have that in South Africa, so that was the radical shift. But it was in a period when I was now just moving from job to job, not sure. I had until I turned 25 to still apply to the South African Air Force if I wanted to sign up for flight training. So up until that year, I still had it in the back of my mind. Should I, shouldn't I wasn't sure. I hadn't found the Lord yet. So, my father was gone. My mom was supportive of everything and anything I wanted to do. Obviously, the mountains gave her plenty gray hair.
Yeah.
But, she was, again, that same support as, if you're curious about this, go and explore it, Dan.
Pursue it. Go for
Yeah.
it. What great parents you had.
Yeah.
Right?
Very
Is that
blessed.
the same way you're raising your children?
So interesting now, because I've led such a crazy risk-filled life, I have almost become risk-averse, and Nadia is now the riskier one of us. So I now balance the lens of being able, when you spend a career looking after people, physically, literally, making sure they don't get hit by a rock, fall in a crevasse, fall off a cliff, you become really attuned to instantly sensing the potential danger and outcome. So I'm so aware of that now, and how I'm overcompensating with my kids, and I'm allowing Nadia to push more. So we balance that. But the underlying philosophy is still, if there's an opportunity for them to explore and do something, if it ticks the safety boxes, we're 100% for it.
Yeah. And going back to the Caucasus, you had a pretty amazing experience there.
Yeah.
Right? Well, let's talk about that for a minute.
So this was 1992. It will be the first of a few years of this exchange type program. And I'm young. I mean, I'm 21, I think, at the time. And everyone else on the team is in their 30s. A couple of folks are in their 40s. And we're climbing these smaller peaks. So we're about 20 miles down line of the Elbrus mountain. So we're in the Caucasus. The end goal is potentially maybe to go and climb Elbrus and be the first South Africans to climb Europe's highest mountain. But for the moment, we're gaining ice and snow skills. So we're climbing smaller alpine peaks, with 30, 40, 50-degree ice and snow, practicing stuff. I mean, it's fantastic. And at the head of this valley is this beautiful 16,000-foot peak, Gesteler. That's the prize. And so after about a week of acclimatizing and gearing up, we decided we're going to go and climb the peak. But this Russian crowd find us and they tell us that there's bad weather coming from the Black Sea, and the Caucasus are squeezed between the Black and the Caspian Sea.
Right.
So as you know, they very quickly can get some intense electrical storms. And we have a sort of a kind of a team chat, and very quickly the team decides, well, we're going to go for it. And there's confusion. The Russians that aren't, we've got Russians in our party, but there's some other Russians who've shared the news with us, and they think, but that's silly, you're going to get caught in the storm. And our team decides we can get up and down this thing in 24 hours because that's when the weather's coming. And Daryl, from South Africa was the only guy who said, no, you guys are crazy, you're going to get caught. Sorry, I've got, a wife and kids, I ain't going. I remember very briefly thinking, well, I'm not going to miss out because I want it on my CV.
Sure, you're 21. You're
21.
Yeah, that's right.
I ain't thinking about
that's right.
safety
Wife,
or
kids,
consequence.
nothing. Yeah.
So we climb the mountain, and to get up the high peak, we have to climb up an intervening peak, and we are much later in the day. We get up there late in the afternoon, and as we're descending, we see the clouds, and so in that very first little neck, we put up a tent, and the storm hits us. And now starts a really strange period of time where there aren't really smart or sensible decisions being made. And so, within an hour of being in those tents, they tell us to collapse the poles because there's a lot of lightning, and they tell us about an accident where a tent got struck and a bunch of people were killed. And then an hour or two later, they say, no, we need to move. We need to keep descending. So we pack up the tent, and now we're moving along. And then 10 minutes later, the lightning is so intense that one of our Russian guys says, we need to shelter under this rock. It's not quite a cave, but it's a rock shelter, and throw your ice axes out there. And so we do that for 10, 15 minutes, and then we're on the go again. And I remember I'm thinking all the time, but that doesn't make sense. Nothing has changed in the 10, 15 minutes. So why are we going again? Yeah. But again, I'm following, and there's about, I guess there were about eight of us in the party. And now we're climbing up that smaller intervening peak. And so now we get to the top of that peak, and
where you're most vulnerable.
Where we're most vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's sometime at night. I can't remember, like the time factor is really blurry, but I'm right at the back with Martin from South Africa and one of the Russian guys, and we're on this snow top, a small little top like this, and I'm waiting now for my rope to be pulled tight because the others have descended down this ridge, but it's a technical ridge, and they part down climbing, lower down they're abseiling. So I can't move until my rope goes tight because we kind of sort of belaying each other over this terrain. But I remember being so terrified, and by the sound of the electricity, the static, and I had my ice axe plunged in the snow, and I was lying flat on it. Yeah. And I looked to my right, and I noticed that Martin is crouching, and I remember thinking, you brave. Now the whole time up to that point, Martin and I have been talking around what's the most epic thing we've experienced, and I'm pretty young. Martin is older, and he's telling me about an experience high up in the mountains in South Africa. And so now and I turn and I notice Martin is crouching, and I'm thinking he's really brave. Then I notice Vova, one of the Russian guys, he's standing, and I remember thinking, you out of your mind. But I didn't say anything because I was just so gripped. Next thing, my rope goes tight, and I know I need to move. And I turn and I tell Martin, you need to get out of here as soon as you can. As I start climbing down, I don't see it, but the two of them get struck by lightning. So literally like a second or two after I leave. And Martin gets killed instantly, and the Russian guy, he's alive. We start a long, protracted rescue over the next 2 days, which is just a nightmare. But he eventually is taken to a hospital somewhere. And I lost contact with those guys. I never know whether he survived. But so we basically descend, and we cut a ledge or we cut the snow off on a ledge and we put up a tiny tent and we spend the night in this tiny tent. And we radio base camp. The next day, base camp can't come and rescue because the snow is so deep. And I'll never forget that night. The Russian guy lay in the middle of us, and he had been struck on the back and the lightning had come out his knee. So his whole insides were burned up. And you couldn't touch him without him just absolutely screaming. So the whole night, this guy's screaming.
Yeah.
And my bum, if I just moved fractionally, I could just feel air, like literally this tent was on a tiny little ledge. And so we self-rescue ourselves. And then 2 days later, we came back with a helicopter to retrieve Martin's body, and it was the team was really divided after that. Daryl obviously was heartbroken. Daryl and Martin were really close friends and climbing partners. And so most of the team decided that they're going to go back home. But a few of us decided we want to stay and we want to go and climb Elbrus because it had been on Martin's heart, And we go and climb Elbrus. And then in the couple of months after that, I'd planned to visit some friends in Germany and just spend a week. I ended up living there for like a year, and I was so close to giving it all up, like I just felt I didn't want to do this anymore. Like the experience really, really rattled me. And I was still 4 years from meeting the Lord. So I couldn't put any of those things into perspective. Like it just felt we had come so close, but I didn't, as much as I said, I'm done. I'm not climbing again. When I got home, an invitation to return to Russia and go to a different part. And so, but those experiences just formed my view on risk and just how to mitigate and handle risk, and probably have kept me alive, through my career.
As you think back over that moment, why were those guys so reckless? Or did you think it was reckless at the time?
So I thought the Russian guy standing for me was just outright reckless. I remember having that thought, you crazy, I didn't have any, so I was the least experienced guy.
Sure,
in
but
the
you
team,
knew,
But something told me that I need to be petrified right now, and I was petrified. I think Martin had been so more experienced than me, he probably didn't feel as petrified, and so he was crouching. But I couldn't understand why the Russian guy was just standing like that, That didn't make any sense to me. And I'll never know, because thankfully, I was protected, obviously, physically, but I also didn't see how it transpired, Like I had literally just turned my back. So I'll never know. I think, when I chat, so the Russian guy started shouting. And when I think back and hear how the Russian guy below was shouting up, it sounds like as I started moving, Martin started moving behind me because the space had been freed up. And as he moved off the top, Vova had gotten struck. And Martin turned around to help him, and he was struck, But I never saw that. So it's just one of those things that you're probably thankful I didn't see.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's also a moment where you just evaluate, is this what I want to do in my life? Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And so I imagine that was pretty tough. At the time, you didn't know the Lord. And, having to deal with that 21 years old.
Yeah.
And seeing your friend laying there dead. That's
crazy.
That's a difficult situation, difficult moment. Yeah. So let's talk about then, you recovered from that moment. You were a changed man. Now you're in Europe. You're climbing some of those European peaks. Yeah. Having a great time there.
Yeah.
And then when did you decide you wanted to go for the 7 summits? How did you decide you wanted to climb Everest? How'd that come about?
So when I left school and I started exploring for the first time, I started writing a diary, and I wrote a page every day for about 10 years of that period of my life. And I've been through it to see if I recorded the actual moment, like the epiphany. And I don't think there was an actual moment. When I stood on Kilimanjaro for the first time, and that was, I don't know, 1991, sometime around there. I think we were just overwhelmed that we had climbed the highest mountain in Africa. But I do know that when I went back to Russia the following year. So this is my second trip in 93. I then went and lived again. So I lived 6 months with my friends in Bonn, and then I came back and lived another 6 months in 93. And at that time, my climbing partner, Sean Disney, joined me. And towards the end of that year, we decided to go and climb Aconcagua in 1992. And sorry, this is actually between, because I went, this is at the end of my first trip to Russia. We go and climb Aconcagua.
Yeah, and for those that are listening, Aconcagua is the highest peak on the South American continent, right? It's between, right on the border of Chile and Argentina. Yeah.
And it's high. It's 23,000 feet. It's, it gets brutal weather. It's 1992. The internet hasn't been invented. Imagine a time when you research to go and climb a mountain and you can't use the internet. But there was actually a time like that. So we trying to, getting a book from the library and from a mate and looking at really dodgy black and white photos of Aconcagua. Well, it doesn't look half bad. And so we conjure up the idea. And I guess maybe without realizing it, the seeds were starting to be sown, because the experience of standing on Kilimanjaro, Sean hadn't climbed Kilimanjaro yet, interestingly. He'd climbed Mount Kenya with me, which is the second highest in Africa. And of course, I had just climbed Elbrus, the highest in Europe. So there's no question in that 1992 year, we were starting to think, well, hey, let's think about maybe climbing the highest in South America, because before the end of the year, we were off to Aconcagua, and we did in fact climb it in like 9 days, which is just crazy, But it was probably in that year. I don't think I would have thought then or answered seriously if you'd asked me, so you're going to go and climb Everest. I don't think we'd contemplated that yet. We were still young, naive. There was no mechanism for us to get to Everest.
Right.
Aconcagua was a significant mountain in 1992. I mean, I was looking at that photo of Sean and I on the summit with the old South African flag, and I just think I see the clothes we were wearing, and I think how young and naive we were. Man, if we just stayed naive, we could have done crazy things.
That's funny. Yeah, I can attest to that. Aconcagua is a high mountain.
Yeah.
And that's that really is the joy of our relationship. The very first thing you say, hey, let's go, if you want to get your feet wet, if you want to dip your toe in the waters of a big mountain, let's go do Kilimanjaro, because it's not technical. You can't, it is a hike, and you have porters. And so, the most you have to carry up is a day pack.
Yep.
And so it sounds kind of sissy until you actually do it. It's not easy, right?
No.
Yeah. I mean, you get up at 11 o'clock in the evening, and, and at midnight you're climbing, and you finally get to the peak at 9 in the morning.
19,000 feet is never easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it was a real moment for me, because it was actually doing something that was very hard to do. And then after that, of course, we went to Aconcagua, maybe for your third or fourth time, and attempted to climb it, and it was a whole nother level of difficulty, and which I never even got close to the top. So base camp, and then the camp just above it was all I
Camp
did.
Canada.
Yeah, Camp Canada. And so one of the things that I think drew me to you was just the idea that you can actually do things that you don't think you can do, and your body will actually do things that your mind doesn't think it can do, and that was intriguing to me, because it was a push, and then just going down there to Aconcagua was an epic trip, and just getting on a big mountain, because they're at a whole nother level big, right? And so all of that was very intriguing and interesting. So we did Kilimanjaro, we attempted Aconcagua, I think twice, and then we went and climbed Elbrus, which that was a epic trip, amazing trip.
Yes.
Yeah. And because just the camaraderie that you build, the friendships that you build, it was a real joy just doing all of that. Hey, thank you for joining us for this episode of the God Seeker Podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, we'd love it if you took a moment just to hit like and subscribe, maybe share it with a friend. But we want to produce the kind of content that inspires, encourages, and equips you in your walk with God. So until we see each other again, keep seeking God. God bless you.